The maintenance tunnels of Galactic Trade Station 447 were quiet except for the steady tapping of boots against metal flooring. Tom Walker moved with purpose through the narrow passages, his toolbox swinging gently at his side. Christmas was just 3 days away, and even here, thousands of light years from Earth, he couldn't help but feel a bit homesick. The station's artificial lighting flickered overhead, reminding him why he was here in the first place. As the only human maintenance engineer on board, Tom had earned a reputation for fixing things that others couldn't quite figure out. Humans might be classified as death worlders by galactic standards, but that also meant they were remarkably good at adapting to problems. Tom stopped at junction B47, where the main power coupling had been acting up. As he opened his toolbox, a flash of blue light caught his eye. He turned quickly, but whatever it was had already disappeared around the corner. This wasn't the first time he'd noticed something following him during his repair rounds. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing through the metal corridors. No response came, but he could have sworn he saw a soft blue glow reflecting off the polished walls. Shrugging it off, Tom returned to his work. The power coupling was a mess of tangled wires and crystalline power regulators, standard alien tech that he'd learned to work with over the past year. As he began the repairs, he started whistling an old Christmas carol, Silent Night. The sound bounced off the walls, creating an almost ethereal echo. That's when he saw it again, a definite shimmer of blue light, and this time, what looked like a crystalline form peeking around the corner. The figure was small, maybe about the size of a human child, with a translucent body that seemed to pulse with inner light. Tom pretended not to notice, continuing his work while keeping the figure in his peripheral vision. He recognized the species now. A Lumini, one of the crystalline beings from the Andromeda galaxy. They were rare on this station, known for their ability to communicate through complex patterns of light. He worked slower than usual, making sure his movements were gentle and deliberate. Most aliens on the station treated humans like unexploded bombs, always worried that their death world instincts might suddenly surface. This little one, though, seemed more curious than afraid. After about 10 minutes of this strange dance, him working, the figure watching, Tom decided to try something different. He pulled out his maintenance tablet, quickly programming it to emit a simple pattern of friendly blue-white light. It was a basic greeting in Lumini light speech, one of the few patterns he learned during his cultural orientation. The effect was immediate. The small figure startled, then hesitantly moved slightly out from behind the corner. Now Tom could see her clearly. Definitely a young Lumini, her crystalline form catching and refracting the station's lights in beautiful patterns. She had a central core that glowed with a soft blue light, different from the usual white gold of adult Lumini. But before he could do anything else, the station's warning system blared to life. Warning: power fluctuation detected in Section B. All non-essential personnel please evacuate. The young Lumini disappeared in a flash of frightened blue light, leaving Tom alone with his half-finished repairs. He sighed, turning back to the power coupling with renewed focus. Something was definitely wrong with the station's power grid, and these fluctuations couldn't be good for any crystalline beings on board. As he worked, Tom couldn't help but smile. In all his time on the station, this was the first alien who hadn't immediately fled at the sight of him. Maybe, just maybe, not everyone believed the scary stories about humans. He made a mental note to bring his spare light projector on tomorrow's maintenance rounds. After all, Christmas was coming, and no one should have to spend the holidays hiding in shadows, even if they were made of living crystal. The observation deck of Station 447 was usually empty during the artificial night cycle. That's why Blue liked it so much. Here, surrounded by the vast expanse of space, she could shine as brightly as she wanted without bothering anyone. Her light patterns, cycling through shades of deep azure and gentle cyan, reflected off the reinforced windows, creating a private light show among the stars. Blue wasn't her real name, of course. Her true name was a complex sequence of light pulses that no non-Lumini could properly pronounce. But she had chosen this simple name for herself after hearing other station residents describe her glow. It made things easier, even if she couldn't tell anyone about it. As she watched the maintenance human from yesterday walk across the deck below, Blue dimmed her lights instinctively. Most grown-ups had warned her about humans. They came from a planet that would kill most species in minutes, a place of crushing gravity, deadly radiation, and aggressive life forms. Even the weakest human could accidentally break a Lumini's crystalline form. But this human didn't seem dangerous. He moved carefully around the station's delicate equipment, and she had watched him fix things that even the station's best engineers couldn't handle. Today, he was checking the observation deck's environmental controls, his toolbox making the soft, clinking sound as he walked. Blue's core pulsed with memory patterns as she recalled her first days on the station. Her parent was an important diplomatic representative, always busy with meetings and negotiations. Back home, young Lumini would spend their days in communal light gardens, sharing stories and learning from each other. But here, Blue was the only young Lumini. The real problem was her light frequency. Most Lumini glowed with white-gold light, perfect for communication. But Blue had been born with a rare variation. Her blue light meant she could barely be seen by her own kind, let alone communicate effectively. Her parent had tried everything, even buying expensive frequency converters, but nothing worked quite right. She watched as the human, she had heard others call him Tom, began working on a control panel. He was whistling again, just like yesterday. The sound fascinated her. Lumini didn't make sounds to communicate, but there was something about the way the melody rose and fell that reminded her of light patterns. Without realizing it, Blue had drifted closer to the deck's edge, her curiosity overwhelming her caution. Tom looked up, and for a moment, their eyes met. Blue knew she should run, but something in his expression made her pause. He wasn't showing the usual fear or discomfort that most aliens displayed around Lumini. Instead, he smiled and gave a small wave. Blue's lights flickered rapidly in surprise, the Lumini equivalent of a startled jump. She quickly backed away from the edge, but didn't completely hide this time. From her safer position, she watched as Tom pulled out his tablet again. Just like yesterday, he made it produce patterns of light. The patterns were simple, almost childlike by Lumini standards, but Blue felt her core warm with excitement. He was trying to talk to her. The lights weren't quite right, more like a toddler's first attempts at speech, but they were definitely meant to be friendly. Before she could decide how to respond, her parents' urgent light patterns called from the residential section. Blue reluctantly pulled away from her viewing spot, her glow dimming with disappointment. As she left, she saw Tom wave goodbye, his tablet still producing those endearingly clumsy light patterns. That night, as Blue settled into her regeneration chamber, her thoughts kept returning to the maintenance human. Her parent and the other diplomats spent hours discussing humans' dangerous nature, but they never mentioned how gentle they could be, or how they might learn to speak with light, just to say hello to a lonely alien child. Tom sat cross-legged in the maintenance tunnel, his back against the cool metal wall. He had finished his repair work early today, leaving him with an extra hour before his next shift. Instead of heading to the break room, he stayed put, his tablet propped on his knee as he studied basic Lumini light patterns. "Hello," he practiced, making his tablet flash in a simple blue sequence. "Friend." Another pattern, this one longer and more complex. He had spent his free time over the past 2 days downloading everything he could find about Lumini communication. It wasn't much. Their species was famously private, but it was a start. A familiar shimmer of blue light appeared around the corner. Tom pretended not to notice, continuing his practice. He had learned that the young Lumini was less likely to run away if he didn't acknowledge her too quickly. After a few minutes, she moved closer than she ever had before, her crystalline form catching the tunnel's light in fascinating ways. Tom kept his movements slow and deliberate as he adjusted his tablet settings. "Would you like to learn about humans?" he asked softly, knowing she probably couldn't respond verbally. As he spoke, He made his tablet display the light pattern for share knowledge. The young Lumini's core pulsed with surprise. Then, hesitantly, she moved even closer. Her own lights flickered in a pattern Tom didn't understand, but her body language, if you could call it that, seemed curious rather than afraid. Tom smiled and pulled up a holographic image of Earth on his tablet. "This is where I'm from," he said, accompanying his words with more light patterns. "It's very different from your homeworld, I imagine." The Lumini, who Tom had heard others call Blue, drifted closer to see the hologram. Her lights pulsed in what seemed like excitement as she watched the image rotate, showing Earth's continents and oceans. To Tom's surprise, Blue reached into a small crystalline pouch attached to her form and pulled out what looked like a standard station translator. She held it up, then pointed to herself and back to the translator. "You can understand me?" Tom asked, amazed. Through the translator, Blue's form brightened in what Tom hoped was confirmation. She typed something into the translator, and a mechanical voice spoke. "Yes. Understand words. Cannot speak back. Light wrong color." Tom felt his heart leap. This was more progress than he'd expected. "That's okay," he said warmly. "We can communicate however you're comfortable. Would you like to know more about Earth?" Blue's entire form seemed to sparkle with enthusiasm. She settled down near Tom, though still keeping a careful distance, and pointed at the hologram again. For the next 40 minutes, Tom showed her images of Earth, its animals, plants, and different environments. Blue was particularly fascinated by the oceans, her lights creating complex patterns whenever she saw images of waves and sea life. "The gravity on Earth is much stronger than here," Tom explained, using both words and light patterns. "That's why many aliens think we're dangerous. But it just means we had to become good at being careful." To demonstrate, Tom picked up a delicate crystal circuit from his toolbox. Despite his large hands, he handled it with perfect precision, not a single scratch or crack appearing on its surface. Blue's lights flickered in what seemed like understanding. Just then, the station's time display chimed the hour. Blue startled slightly, her lights dimming in what Tom was beginning to recognize as disappointment. She needed to leave. As she turned to go, she typed one last message into her translator. "Tomorrow." Tom felt a warm smile spread across his face. "Same time, same place," he agreed, adding the light pattern for promise. Blue's core glowed brightly for a moment, the equivalent of a happy smile, Tom guessed, before she disappeared around the corner. Tom began packing up his tools, his mind already planning tomorrow's lessons. Maybe he would tell her about Christmas next. After all, someone who communicated through light might appreciate a holiday that involved putting bright decorations on trees. "And that's why we put lights on Christmas trees," Tom explained, showing Blue a hologram of a decorated pine tree. "The lights remind us of stars and hope and spending time with people we care about." Blue's crystalline form sparkled with interest as she watched the holographic lights twinkle. They were sitting in their usual meeting spot in the maintenance tunnel, but today Tom had brought extra visual aids to explain the holiday that was now just 2 days away. Through her translator, Blue asked, "Why give gifts?" Tom thought carefully about how to explain it. "Gifts are a way to show people that we care about them," he said, making his tablet display warm, friendly light patterns. "Sometimes the best gifts aren't expensive things. They're items that show we understand what makes someone happy." Blue's lights pulsed in a pattern that Tom had learned meant she was processing new information. She typed into her translator, "Like fixing things that are broken. You give that gift to the station every day." Tom smiled, touched by her observation. "That's a great example. Yes, sometimes a gift can be." "Maintenance worker Walker." A sharp voice cut through their conversation. Tom looked up to see Officer Reed, the head of station security, striding toward them. "Step away from the diplomatic dependent immediately." Blue's lights dimmed in fear, her form shrinking back. Tom stood slowly, keeping his movements calm and deliberate. "Officer Reed, we were just talking about. Do you have any idea what you're doing? Reed interrupted, his antennae twitching with agitation. That's the child of the Lumini ambassador. We've received reports of a human lurking around diplomatic areas. Do you want to cause an interspecies incident? Tom felt his heart sink. He had known their meetings might cause trouble, but he hadn't expected this level of reaction. Sir, I was just. Security Protocol 47B clearly states that maintenance personnel are not to interact with diplomatic dependents without prior authorization. Reed continued, especially humans. Do you know how fragile Lumini crystals are? One wrong move and... A series of urgent light patterns interrupted him. Blue had moved forward, her translator raised. He is careful, the mechanical voice stated. Shows me Earth. Teaches me light patterns. First friend on station. Officer Reed's antennae drooped slightly in surprise, but he quickly recovered. Young one, while your input is appreciated, regulations exist for a reason. Worker Walker, consider this an official warning. Return to your designated maintenance areas immediately. Tom nodded, gathering his tools. He glanced at Blue, trying to convey reassurance through the simple light patterns he knew. I understand, sir. I'll just pack up my... Now, Walker. With a heavy heart, Tom left, looking back once to see Blue's dim, sad glow. As he rounded the corner, he heard Officer Reed speaking into his communicator about updating the ambassador on the situation. That evening, alone in his quarters, Tom stared at his toolkit and tablet. The station's reaction wasn't surprising. Humans were still seen as unpredictable, dangerous creatures by most species. But Blue's words kept echoing in his mind. First friend on station. He picked up his tablet, looking at the Christmas hologram still displayed on it. The twinkling lights reminded him of Blue's crystal form. An idea began to form in his mind, a way to help Blue communicate, to give her a real gift that would matter. It would be tricky. He'd have to be careful not to violate any more regulations. But as he began sketching out his plan, Tom smiled. After all, what was Christmas about if not finding ways to share light in the darkness? He just hoped he could finish his project before Blue's parent decided to keep her away entirely. 2 days until Christmas didn't give him much time to work with. Tom's quarters looked like a small electronics shop had exploded inside it. Parts from his personal repair kit lay scattered across his desk, while his tablet displayed complicated diagrams of Lumini crystal structures. He had been working nonstop since his shift ended, trying to turn his idea into reality. The base of his project was a standard communication crystal, the kind used in ship-to-ship messaging. Tom had traded his dessert rations for a week to get it from a friendly cargo handler. Now came the hard part, modifying it to match Blue's unique frequency. Okay, he muttered to himself, adjusting his micro-tools. If I can just align these lattices correctly. His hands, usually steady from years of maintenance work, shook slightly from exhaustion. He had been up for nearly 20 hours straight. The crystal hummed softly as he worked, its inner structure gradually changing under his careful adjustments. Tom had studied every technical manual he could find about Lumini biology and crystal technology. What he was attempting had never been done before, at least not by a human. A knock at his door made him jump. Maintenance worker Walker. A voice called through the intercom. This is station security. Random quarters inspection. Tom's heart raced. He quickly but carefully wrapped the crystal in protective cloth and stored it in his toolkit. Random inspections weren't unusual, but the timing couldn't be worse. He opened the door to find Officer Reed and another security officer. Their antennae twitched as they surveyed his room. Quite a mess you have here, Walker, Reed noted, eyes narrowing at the scattered parts. Just doing some personal projects, sir, Tom replied calmly, though his pulse was pounding. Christmas is coming up, you know. Indeed. Reed's antennae focused on Tom's toolkit. And what exactly are you working on? Communication equipment modifications, Tom said truthfully. Nothing dangerous. Just trying to improve signal clarity. The other officer picked up a crystal alignment tool. This is pretty sophisticated gear for a maintenance worker. Part of my Earth certification, Tom explained. We're required to understand multiple technology types. Makes us more adaptable. Reed stared at him for a long moment. We've received reports of unauthorized equipment being gathered. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? No, sir, Tom said, meeting his gaze steadily. Everything here is personally owned or properly requisitioned. After what felt like hours, Reed nodded. Very well. But remember, any unauthorized modifications to station equipment will result in immediate termination of your contract. After they left, Tom leaned against the wall, letting out a shaky breath. Through his window, he could see the observation deck where he used to meet Blue. She was there, her dim blue glow barely visible from this distance. He returned to his work with renewed determination. The crystal needed to do more than just match Blue's frequency. It had to translate it into the standard Lumini spectrum. If he succeeded, she would be able to communicate with her own people properly for the first time. Hours passed as Tom made microscopic adjustments. His hands were cramping, and his eyes burned from focusing on tiny crystal structures. But finally, just as the station's day cycle was beginning, the crystal pulsed with a perfect blue light, exactly matching Blue's frequency. Tom held it up, watching the light dance across his walls. Now came the really hard part. Finding a way to give it to her without breaking any more station regulations. Christmas was tomorrow. He had the perfect gift. He just needed one chance to deliver it. The station's warning sirens jolted Tom awake. He had fallen asleep at his desk, the modified crystal still clutched in his hand. Red emergency lights pulsed through his quarters as the station's AI made an announcement. Critical power fluctuation detected in diplomatic sector. Environmental systems failing. All maintenance personnel report immediately. This is not a drill. Tom's blood ran cold. The diplomatic sector, where Blue lived. He grabbed his toolkit and ran, not even bothering to change out of his wrinkled uniform. The crystal went into his pocket, wrapped safely in its protective cloth. The corridors were chaos. Aliens of various species hurried in all directions, some evacuating, others rushing to help. Tom's maintenance override got him through the security checkpoints, where even Officer Reed was too busy coordinating evacuations to stop him. When Tom reached the diplomatic sector, he immediately saw the problem. The environmental field generators were flickering, creating unstable pockets of atmosphere. For most species, this would be uncomfortable but survivable. For a crystalline Lumini, whose body needed specific environmental conditions to maintain integrity, a flash of familiar blue light caught his eye. Blue was trapped in a corner, her crystal form showing signs of stress. The failing environmental field was causing temperature fluctuations that could shatter her structure. Her parent was there too, their golden light pulsing in panic as they tried to reach her, but the unstable field prevented them from getting close. "Let me help," Tom shouted, running forward. "I know how to fix this." Blue's parent turned to him, their lights flashing what Tom recognized as desperate agreement. The station's regular engineers were overwhelmed, trying to restart the main power grid. This section couldn't wait for them. Tom pulled out his diagnostic tools, quickly scanning the local field generator. The power crystal was cracked, causing cascade failures in the environmental systems. He needed to stabilize it, but a complete repair would take too long. Then he remembered the crystal in his pocket, the one he'd modified to match Blue's frequency. It was the right size, and he'd already adjusted its lattice structure to handle frequency changes. It could work as a temporary replacement. "Blue," he called out, using his tablet to project light patterns. "I need you to hold on for 2 more minutes. Can you do that?" Her light flickered weakly in response, but she held steady. Tom worked faster than he ever had before, his death-world muscles and reflexes letting him make adjustments that would have taken other engineers precious extra minutes. He pulled out the broken power crystal and, with trembling hands, inserted his modified one. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the environmental field stabilized, its color shifting to a familiar blue tint. Blue's form immediately began to recover. Her parent rushed forward, wrapping her in a protective embrace of golden light. Other engineers arrived, staring in shock at the jury-rigged repair that had saved the section. "How did you know that would work?" Officer Reed demanded, arriving at the scene. "That crystal shouldn't be compatible with our systems." "Because I made it compatible," Tom explained, exhausted but relieved. "I've been studying Lumini crystal structures, trying to understand their frequencies. I originally made it as a Christmas gift for Blue, to help her communicate better. I just didn't expect to use it like this." Blue's parent approached Tom, their lights creating patterns more complex than any he'd seen before. To his surprise, he understood some of it: gratitude, respect, and something that might have been apology. Through all the chaos, Tom noticed it was exactly midnight. Christmas Day had just begun, and he had given his gift after all, just not in the way he planned. Christmas morning on Station 447 was unlike any Tom had experienced before. The diplomatic sector's main hall had been transformed. Crystalline decorations hung from the ceiling, refracting light in beautiful patterns that reminded him of Earth's aurora borealis. At the center stood an artificial tree, its branches draped with tiny light-emitting crystals that pulsed in sync with the station's power grid. Tom stood nervously in his freshly pressed uniform, holding a small package. After last night's crisis, station policy had changed dramatically. Not only was he allowed in the diplomatic sector, but he had been officially invited to the first-ever multi-species Christmas celebration. Blue sat with her parent near the tree, her crystal form glowing brighter than Tom had ever seen it. The emergency repair had worked better than anyone expected. The modified crystal not only stabilized the environmental systems, but also created a field that perfectly matched Blue's unique frequency. Now she could adjust her light output to communicate with anyone. "Worker Walker," Officer Reed approached, his antennae now relaxed instead of twitching with suspicion. "The ambassador would like to speak with you." Blue's parent rose, their golden light creating patterns that the station's main translator converted to words. "My child tells me you have been teaching her about this Christmas tradition. Please, explain it to all of us." Tom looked around at the gathered aliens, not just Lumini, but representatives from dozens of species, all watching him with curiosity rather than fear. "Christmas," he began, "is about bringing light to dark places. It's about giving gifts that show people they're not alone." He held up his package. "Which is why I made this, even before the emergency." He handed the package to Blue. Inside was a small crystal pendant, a second communication crystal he'd modified as a backup, but hadn't needed to use during the crisis. "This one is just for you," he explained, "so you can always talk to anyone, even if you're far from the station's systems." Blue's lights danced with joy as she examined the pendant. "Through the translator," she said, "I have a gift for you too." She handed Tom a crystal of her own, one that pulsed with a warm, golden light. Her parent explained, "My daughter insisted. It is a diplomatic communication crystal, modified by our engineers. With it, you are officially recognized as a friend of the Lumini people, the first human to receive such an honor." Tom's vision blurred with tears as he accepted the crystal. "Thank you," he whispered. Officer Reed cleared his throat. "In light of recent events, station security has revised its protocols regarding human personnel. Worker Walker, you are being promoted to Chief of Interspecies Engineering. We believe your unique perspectives could be valuable." The next few hours were a blur of celebration. Blue taught other alien children how to make their crystals pulse in patterns matching Earth Christmas songs. Tom showed them holograms of Earth's holiday traditions, while various species shared their own celebration customs. As the party continued, Tom found a quiet moment to sit with Blue near the tree. "Was this what you wanted for Christmas?" he asked, watching her play with her new pendant. Her lights formed perfect words in the air. No translator needed. "Better. Got family." She pointed at him, then at all the gathered aliens. Vigor family now. Tom smiled, touching the diplomatic crystal he now wore. On Earth, humans had always looked up at the stars and wondered if they were alone in the universe. Now, on a station far from home on Christmas Day, he realized something important. Sometimes the best families were the ones you built yourself, even if they were made of starlight and crystal. "Merry Christmas, Blue," he said softly. Her lights twinkled in response, spelling out in perfect English, "Merry Christmas, Tom."